Good morning. I'm David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Editor for the Tennessean. And today we have the pleasure of having Councilman Bob Mendes, who is running for re-election for Councilman at Large here in Metro Nashville-Davidson County. We have with us today as well Maria DeVarine, our Executive Editor here at the Tennessean. These are a series of public service interviews that we're doing this week with candidates for mayor and also at-large races. We have the opportunity to talk about policy, philosophy, and other things that are going on in the city. So welcome, Councilman. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, tell us, why are you running for re-election?
Well, I'm running for re-election because I feel like the work of my first term, which I'm just wrapping up, is not over with yet. These days, ever since the Berry administration came apart, I feel like there's been a loss of direction for the city. And from the council, I'm able to provide some leadership on issues, and I think that's important while the city's still working at getting its footing back.
Over the last two cycles for the budget, you've been particularly vocal in terms of the financing, both in your blog and also at the council chambers. You were the leader, not a leader, when it came to the property tax discussion and the increased discussion. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to propose that and why you think it's an important issue?
Sure. It's important because the city has fallen out of its historical practices and is grossly underfunded right now, and we're taking it out on employees' wages and constituent services. We're in this habit now of 2 years in a row. The city budget calls for selling off some $40 million worth of assets. And that's fundamentally not sustainable. And again, in this time when there really isn't strong leadership or strong direction for the city, I feel like even though it's unpopular among some, it has to be said, it has to be talked about that we fundamentally don't have enough money for the city government. There's a lot of causes for it, but it needs to be talked about.
What are some of your other top 2 or 3 priorities if you're reelected?
So I've worked hard on financial transparency issues over these last several years, particularly when it comes to economic incentives. We've had tax increment financing frozen in the city for about 9 months through an agreement between me, the mayor's office, and MDHA, and the council is considering now some significant TIF reform legislation. And the idea is that if we are more transparent about goals and implementation of economic incentives, then the good things that happen with growth will be shared by everybody in the county, not just a few. And it's really important also that the perception of the public that it's fair come through. And that, we don't have that right now. We need to work toward that.
Is there a place for economic incentives in the future? And the context is you recently wrote a blog about the Omni and also the property tax abatement as well as the TIF
Right.
financing as well, and who's paying for it and how the city is not getting those dollars essentially for several years to come. Should Nashville still be in a place where it's giving economic incentives for businesses to come in?
The number one thing that we should do is set some goals, some agreed upon goals for economic incentives. I think to say no more economic incentives ever would be short-sighted. But what we don't have right now is an agreement on goals. For 25 years, the city has been really good at accomplishing whatever its number one objective is, whether that's downtown tourism or soccer or hockey or football. And all those boxes have been checked now. And if you go around asking people, what is the objective of the city? What's the number one goal right now? It's not that there's even a disagreement. There's just crickets. People don't know. And we should not be engaging in economic development unless there's strongly stated and agreed upon goals for it. If we had goals that everybody agreed upon through a consensus process, then having economic incentives to achieve those goals would be fine.
Yeah, just as a quick follow-up, the Amazon debate has been really interesting to watch from my vantage point. On the one hand, the chamber has been very boisterous in terms of the way that it's approached Amazon, but you've also had labor groups that have been very concerned about access to opportunity for them.
Sure.
And is there a way to balance the needs and wants of these different groups?
I mean, I think there is. I don't think that we, as a city, are doing a good job of having that conversation. But listen, all the demographers talk about population growth. The South, and Nashville in particular, is going to keep growing. We are going to keep getting bigger. We're not going to be able to put a wall around the city and keep people out. And so if we're going to have growth, we should have growth the way we want it, not just how it happens randomly. And Amazon, on the grand scale of things, like, I think that's a good company to have in Nashville. But we should have, before companies like that show up, objectives about what we're trying to do for workers and affordable housing and wages in town, so we can ask them to participate in that.
We hear a lot as the city is trying to court companies to move here to Nashville about the school district. Can you talk to us a little bit about whether the mayor or the council should be more involved in governing the local school district?
Well, that is a hot topic. Here's my view. I think the school board is set up to be independently elected, and under our system, they get a allocation of money from the metro government, and I think that we should trust them to do the job. Now, have they done always a good job? Not really. Have they done a worse job than the council and the mayor is doing for the rest of the city? I'm not sure they're doing a worse job. I'm not sure that a bunch of part-time council people could take over making decisions for the billion-dollar school system. Also, that seems tough to me. What I've always encouraged school board members when I talk to them is the 5-4 votes are okay. Like, you don't have to be unanimous. Have a disagreement, vet all the sides, vote. 5-4 is fine. I'd rather have us moving forward as a city, as a school system, with decisions that are 5-4 made quickly and executed quickly, rather than getting bogged down trying to find consensus where there may not be consensus to be had.
Okay.
If we could go a little bit deeper in terms of where we are in Nashville financially, because one question I hear a lot from folks: how is it that we're booming and the skyline's growing, yet the city can't balance its budget?
Right, and so two parts of that I'll mention. One is, although people don't love to hear it, we have a very low tax environment in Nashville, Tennessee. There is no income tax compared to every other big city in the state. We've got the lowest property tax rate by a lot. We've got the lowest property tax rate in the 55-year history of Metro. And people don't love that because it's expensive to live in this city and all cities. But we have as low a tax environment as you can find in a big city in America, period, full stop. That said, the discomfort people feel about why the city isn't sharing in the boom with downtown is that we hear about the convention center having a $100 million plus pile of money saved up, and we see soccer stadium deals and we see the Amazon deals. And this is where I think transparency, my theory all along is transparency would help. If everybody had better information about what the goals were for economic development and how to measure it, then I think people would feel better and we'd make better decisions. Right now, there is not any metric that the city applies to figure out what the benefit of an economic incentive deal is. You get pie in the sky, home cooked analyses from the companies that receive the benefits, but there is no agreed upon way to figure out whether economic redevelopment districts are good or bad financially for the city. And in the absence of information, people fill in the blanks themselves with different answers, and we get the disagreement that we find.
You mentioned earlier about the city selling off assets, and we can talk about parking, for example, right, because this year's budget is based upon something that you as a council person have not even voted on yet.
Correct.
So how does that work? I mean, for someone who is trying to account for, that money isn't there, right? And so how is that possible that you can do that?
Well, we can look back at the fiscal year that ended yesterday as an example. That budget had $38 million worth of one-time property sales built into the budget. And through the course of the year, the city accomplished 16 million of the sales. And so there was 22 million short for what was in the budget. And we did what everybody do with their house. The house household finances, you hit the savings account. So we hit our savings account, the city's savings account for the last $22 million. And so if this upcoming year, if the parking deal doesn't get approved, somewhere we're going to have to materialize $30 million. The mayor's office has been extremely tight-lipped about what they'll do about that. The best answer I can get, sort of off the record from unnamed finance department people, is that it'll be a combination of, if they can't approve the parking deal, it'll be a combination of hoping that the city does better on revenue than is projected, and trying to refinance some tax increment financing loans to make up the difference. Which, again, refinancing, it's not magic money. It's just extending debt payments off into the future. That's not necessarily good or bad, but nobody should pretend it's just found money. It's just money you have to pay later instead of now.
Switching to transportation, we know Nashville was unable to pass a referendum in 2018, and our transportation issues continue. Can you tell us what you would like to see going forward to address the traffic concerns?
Sure. I do think we need a dedicated revenue source for transit at some point. I believe we're the only city in America our size or bigger that doesn't have a dedicated revenue source for transit. And when we look around, the poor service hours and frequency on existing bus lines, and really doing a bad job on bike infrastructure, that all comes down to a dedicated funding source. And so we need that sooner or later. I think that the plan that got voted down was too ambitious, and if it had focused on a rail line and expanding bus service, then I think it probably would have passed. I think there's a lot of support for the idea of more bus service, greater frequency, greater hours, the kind of bus service that we're used to seeing when we visit other cities.
Thank you.
As just to follow up on that, I mean, in a sense, we're voting with our feet because 72% of Nashvillians commute one person in a car to work. And so how do you incent people to do that? Now, you biked here so that people know that they biked to 1801 West in the new location of the Tennessean. But how do you get people to either carpool or find some other way to get to and from where they need to get to?
Well, it's probably a group of smaller solutions that add up to making a difference. One, we just talked about buses. I think we all know when we visit other cities, if buses run where you want to go with the hours you want to get there with the frequency where you don't have to stand outside for 20 minutes, you're probably going to, like, everybody's taking public transportation somewhere else. So that would be a big part of it. And then, Council Lady Angie Henderson has done a good job of raising the issue every time we do an economic incentive, of asking what incentives those companies offer employees to take alternative transportation or to carpool, and we probably need to do more of that, follow her lead on that with companies that come to town.
Some people have pointed to scooters as an alternative transportation mechanism that the city should embrace. Can you tell us what your viewpoint is of scooters?
Sure. So number one, when the council passed the scooter bill last August and then revised it in April, honestly, it never crossed our minds that the mayor's office would do zero enforcement of it, literally zero enforcement. If the police chief got told, get some tickets written, it would happen. If Public Works got told to get scooters out of the right-of-way, it would happen. And so I feel like a total ban is premature given the complete lack of effort that's gone into enforcement. I ride a bike around the inner loop of the city a lot. And to me, the scooters expose the shortage of bike lanes that we've got in town. I've been in a couple other cities with a lot of scooters, both internationally in Mexico City and here in the U.S. And if there's a lot of bike lanes, then the scooters are on the bike lanes and they're not the nuisance that we find here. That said, if the executive branch won't or can't enforce it, sooner or later we will have to ban them. I don't think that's the next block in the flow chart, though.
Thank you.
What is your sense in terms of any kind of economic forecasting that you've seen? Because we've talked about the hope that there'll be new revenue, but I keep on hearing that there might be a recession. We go through these economic cycles. How will Nashville be able to weather an economic downturn given the current budget situation?
Well, that's a good question. For a long time now, when the national economy goes into recession, Nashville gets into it later and comes out earlier, just because the macroeconomic push to have more people moving here. And as people move here in a downturn, it helps prop up our economy. I'm a business lawyer by trade and actually help companies in financial distress. I think that whatever recession might be coming down the road will not be anywhere near as bad as in '08. I do worry that if the economy got stagnant at all, it would make the choices that much harder in the metro government. Sooner or later, I know the mayor's office has denied it, but they absolutely have told multiple council members in the last few weeks that they're going to pursue a tax rate increase next year. And that if that were to happen, I think it would even out the city's finances. If it doesn't happen and we get caught flat-footed in a recession, there will be hard choices. 10 years ago when that happened, in order to keep employees from being let go, the city refinanced a bunch of debt to make room to be able to pay for everything still.
There's also the question of the outlying counties. Recently Rutherford County and Murfreesboro, they've increased taxes. There's also a new garbage fee that has gone up as well. And there's been a lot of discussion that I've heard about, what do people who live in other counties and yet work and play in Nashville, what should their contribution be to this economy? And is there a way to get a fairer share, for example?
Anybody who wants to email me with ideas about that, I would love to hear it. We've got all the surrounding counties controlled by state Republican legislators, and so I think any unilateral effort to shift costs to the surrounding counties would probably be met with preemption by the state. And hopefully when we get to transit, that's going to be the big ticket item to share. And my hope is whoever is in the mayor's office next is able to lead a coalition so we can get something regional on transit, because sharing that cost would be a big benefit for Nashville.
I think another issue that we have touched on for the last year or two, particularly through David Plazas' efforts, is affordable housing. Can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on affordable housing and what the city should do to meet that need?
Sure. So early in the current term, we passed some legislation called inclusionary zoning, and it was I don't know if I say this proudly or not, but it was the most anemic inclusionary zoning law in America, and it was endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce here in town, and despite being very weak and a small step forward and endorsed by the Chamber, the state of Tennessee preempted it. And so we literally, when a developer comes in and says, I'd like to build this big, huge thing, we cannot say as a city, great, we'll do it if you build some affordable housing. So that's off the table. It basically backs us into market solutions. The thing I would do, and I've suggested this to the administration, and so far no takers on it, is I would try to take advantage of the new opportunity zones that are part of Trump's tax bill from a couple years ago. And opportunity zones, very briefly, make it be so developers, if they hold for 10 years, don't pay any capital gains tax, which is a tremendous benefit. And there are large pools of capital around the nation trying to figure out where the good opportunity zones are, and Nashville's are as hot as anywhere. So what I would do is I would take some of the money that we're going to spend on infrastructure anyway, roads, sewer, water, those kind of improvements, and I'd put it on the table and say, hey, developers, everybody, whoever wows us the most on a proposal to get affordable housing in an opportunity zone, we'll spend some of our infrastructure dollars in and around your project. And that would be a market-driven, not ordering people to do things. But every developer who does a really big project needs some infrastructure, and typically they have to pay for itself. If we traded paying for some of the infrastructure dollars in exchange for them building affordable housing, it would be their choice, it would be market-driven. I think that's the best opportunity we've got, given what the state's done on the inclusionary zoning laws.
Okay.
And just to follow up on Maria's question, the mayor has his under one roof plan, $500 million in taxpayer money over 10 years to essentially build on what MDHA has already been doing with Envision Casey. I've heard people who say this is visionary because it's about accelerating mixed income living. Others say this is a bailout of MDHA because it hasn't been able to get the financing that is needed in time. What are your thoughts about that particular plan, and do you think it's feasible?
So first of all, he calls it 500 million. Based on current spending levels, it would be about 150 million of new money and 350 of money we were probably going to spend anyway. I view it as more, I don't know if bailout's the right word, but it's clear now from what we're being told that MDHA cannot accomplish the Envision projects in anything less than a generation. And that's very different than what we were all told 2 and 3 years ago, or frankly anything before April of this year. They've got 3 of the projects underway, and like anytime you ask them, they said, we got this. But we heard in the council chamber that it would be a multi-generational project. We heard that in late April or early May. And so there's no way to look at it as it is Metro coming in and helping speed up multi-generational to the best estimate we heard was between 15 and 20 years, which is still a long time. And so it is bailout, I don't know if it's the right word, but it is helping MDHA. The thing that I want to know is that if we're moving from watching MDHA accomplish Envision Casey to being a multi-$100 million investor in Envision Casey, then the city's interest goes from spectator to investor, and there's a lot more information that I want to know before we get into spending that money, because we should know whether the first money is the last money or whether it's going to get doubled over time. We got told it would be 15 to 20 years to finish it, and Mayor Briley's talking about committing 10 years. So what happens in the second 5, the last 5 to 10 years? There's a whole different level of analysis, and we get, if I get reelected and when this bond issuance comes around, I think at the end of the year for the first money on that, I think there's going to be a lot of questions about what it means for Metro to be an investor. If the deal all along had been MDHA saying, hey, Metro, we can't do this, can you help us? Then that would have been a different conversation.
Switching gears slightly to more entertainment and leisure, we know there's a huge fan base in our region for soccer. We've got the U.S. against Jamaica in a big game Wednesday, I believe, here at Nissan Stadium. There's a growing course of people who want the MLS stadium built at the fairgrounds, but there are competing viewpoints about that. Can you share with us what you would like to see at the future of the fairgrounds?
Well, anybody who's opposed to soccer stadium, I got bad news for them because that's a done deal. That passed last summer. So there's going to be a soccer stadium, period. And there's the 10 acres. I hear some talk about people wanting to undo the giveaway of the 10 acres. And I don't think that's undoable at this point based on what passed the council last summer. Now, the soccer team owners looked council members in the face and said that they were going to do everything they could to honor and protect the long-term uses, meaning flea markets, expos, and racing at the fairgrounds. And I expect them to honor that. I mean, I want to see those uses continue, and that's an open question about whether that's going to be able to happen. But that's important for a lot of people in Davidson County.
Okay.
As an at-large council member, you have competing interests both in terms of rural and urban areas. In a previous interview, we talked about the zoning process and how you balance the needs of Jolton versus the needs of Hillsborough Village, for example. How have you been able to effectively do that in your first term, and how do you continue to plan to do that?
One of the best things that at-large council members get to do is when there's a vacancy for districts, we fill in for a while. And so I've filled in for a total of, I think, 10 or 11 months for 2 different districts, both out in the southeast part of the county that have plenty of rural area. And I've been involved in issues up around Goodlettsville and in Jolton also, Whites Creek. There are fewer people in those parts of the county, but they're feeling under threat from development and growth, just like everybody else. I think one of the worst traffic situations in all the city is out in where District 13 and 29 meet, which is basically between the airport and the lake at the far east end of the county. It's a daily gridlock where sometimes people on Elm Hill Pike who live near the lake take sometimes a half hour just to get on the interstate at Donaldson. So a half hour to buy your way onto the interstate to come into downtown. And those problems are real. And that's one of the things that we really, as a city, it's easy to focus on downtown, but the traffic snarls that happen in localized places where roads that were rural 15, 20 years ago are now these giant suburban knots of cars. We're not doing enough to help those parts of town.
So I know we're nearing the end of our time with you, but on a lighter note, if you had to give someone 3 recommendations of what to do in Nashville, what would those be?
So I always, my wife and I recommend one of the museums, either the Frist or the Country Music Hall of Fame, depending on the likes and dislikes of who's visiting town. And on music, we like to push people toward Station Inn, which is amazingly still operational and looks the same. And then we used to not say hot chicken, but everybody comes down and wants to try hot chicken, so we'll usually send them to a couple, hot chicken locations.
Okay.
And
in these last few minutes, would you tell viewers why you want their votes and how they can contact you if they want to learn more about you?
Sure. Thank you for that. Well, I would appreciate the opportunity to give it another 4 years worth of work. We've talked more about the financial transparency issues today, but I've worked just as hard on equity issues also. I think I'm one of the few council members that came out actively in support of the Community Oversight Board referendum that won by 60-some% in the county. I spent a lot of time on Nashville General Hospital and trying to get its finances in a good place with an active eye toward maintaining the service, not cutting service or eliminating it like some people look at it with. And those equity issues paired with the transparency issues are unfinished business. And like I led with, the city is in a weird place where it's difficult to find a direction, where on the horizon are we sailing towards? And from the at-large position in the council, I only get 1 vote out of 40, but it is a position where we're able to weigh in on the direction of the city, and I'd like the opportunity to do that for 4 more years.
And how can people get in contact with you or learn more about you?
So you can check out my website, which is mendez4nashville.com, or my Twitter feed is at MendezBob. And if you search Facebook, you can find our Facebook page too. On the website, I've got a blog with information about every imaginable Metro topic, and my Twitter feed has a lot of links to that also.
We want to thank you so much for joining us here today. To our viewers, we want to thank you, and remember that July 2nd is the deadline to register to vote. July 12th is the start of early voting, and make sure to vote by August 1st. Your vote is your voice. Have a wonderful day.